What we looked at last Wednesday night, right, you may have to help me with the first one. There we go. We'll just put them all up there. These are 7 basic assumptions in the theory of evolution. Now, before I mention that, there was a survey that was taken not too long ago. There's a new show on Thursday nights on, I think it's GBN or GSN, with Jeff Foxworthy, on the Bible. And this survey was presented last Thursday night, and I thought it was kind of interesting. It was a survey of Christians, supposed Christians, okay? They could be other religions, but they were claimed to be Christians and everything. They asked them who believed that the 6 days of creation in Genesis, the first chapter, were 24-hour days. It was a multiple choice question. The choices was 78%, 54%, and 18%. So, by a show of hands, how many of you think that the answer was 78%? How many of you think the answer was 54%? How many of you think the answer was 18%? Okay, at least we have a few here that care. The answer was 54%, which is kind of interesting because if you're a professed Christian and you know the Scriptures, then you should be able to go to Exodus, the 20th chapter, and you would know that they are 24-hour days. But there are people even within the Lord's church that will question as to whether it's 24-hour days. And that's why we look at some of these theories here, these 7 basic theories. And this first one, assumption here, non-living things give rise to living material. This one directly contradicts accepted law of biology. And the rest of these theories are devoid of evidence for transitional forms from fossils or known mechanisms in genetics. So in the final analysis, the evolutionist and the creationist had the same evidence from which to begin and work. And the differences come from the interpretation of that evidence, though. The question is, which interpretation is more reasonable? You and I certainly would say the creationist evidence is the most reasonable. In fact, in Romans, the first chapter, verse 20, if you want to turn your Bibles there, I didn't put it up on the screen. The Apostle Paul talking to the church at Rome in Romans, the first chapter, verse 20. He said, since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. So when we look at these 7 basic assumptions in the theory of evolution, go back one here, there we go. It does not mean that all the plants and animals which exist today have come into existence by this means. And that would be like saying mud is brown, therefore everything is brown. Or God's explanation found in the Bible would make a better fit, obviously. God created various plants or types of plants and animals, and these reproduce according to their general type, and we discussed that last Wednesday night. Natural selection, working on these basic types, could much more explain the variations which are found today. For instance, the moth is still a moth, black or white. And so the general theory of evolution affirms that from the chaos of a Big Bang came the current order of our universe. It says that from a disorderly sea of inanimate molecules came the order of the first living organisms. And it says from the lesser order of lower life forms arose the greater order and complexity of higher life forms. So the whole theory then is contrary to known, observed, and scientific law. While the general theory of evolution stands opposed to this known law of science, the Bible is in harmony with it. And which is more believable? In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, or the heavens and the earth are the result of mere chance as all things became more ordered as a result of a Big Bang? And the fact is that you and I must not be ashamed of our faith. And we need to take a stand and make sure that we are firm on our convictions and on our belief. The truth of God is more credible than the theories of man. And as a Christian, we should be able to prove that. So, With that said then, why do people believe in evolution? Because they don't believe in God, okay?
Because they don't want to be accountable.
They don't want to be accountable? Is that what you said? Okay.
They're brainwashed through our education system.
Brainwashed through our education system. All right. Any other thoughts? Yes, Cal.
Ego.
Ego?
I don't think that we want to acknowledge a higher authority. In other words, mankind, or they, have got to be the highest being ever created. Okay? And if they acknowledge something higher than them, I think ego, in a lot of times, is what you said.
Well, and you're exactly right. In fact, every one of you are correct in what you've said, because all of these are responses as to why people believe in evolution. So the question is then, as was kind of suggested here, the main reason most people believe in education or evolution is that they have been told that most educated people believe in evolution. Part of it's ego, part of it's our teaching today. But I would suggest that there are, in addition to this reason, there are three reasons why people believe in evolution. And the first reason is we believe in evolution is perhaps best expressed by Henry Morse in his book, The Twilight of Evolution, when he says the main reason most educated people believe in evolution is simply because they have been told that most education people believe in evolution. And that was actually published in 1963. Okay? That was the first one I put up there. And the second one I put up there is perhaps best expressed by the eminent evolutionist, D.M.S. Watson of the University of London, when he said evolution itself is accepted by zoologists not because it has been observed to occur or can be proved by logically coherent evidence, but because the only alternative, special creation, is clearly incredible. And then the third reason, and I just put the second one up there, didn't I? Here's the third one, and that is that they are honestly convinced that there is evidence to support such a belief. So what we have here is they genuinely feel they have made the correct choice in believing in evolution instead of creation. Likely they are unaware that many of the evidences of evolution have been proven wrong, and possibly they have never heard the alternative explanations offered by creationists or seen the evidence which supports creation as the correct view of origins. So it's clear from these statements that there is a deep prejudice in the minds of such people. Prejudice against God and against His concept of creation. And these people do not believe in evolution because of the evidence. They believe in evolution because they do not wish to believe in God. And that was expressed by Janice over here. So for the sake of space, no attempt will be made to prove creation is true as such. But it is our intention in these lessons to show that much of the evidence offered by evolutionists is not evidence at all and has been shown to be false or is better explained by the creation model. So when we look at comparative embryology, in his Origin of Species, Darwin asserted in a discussion that occupied 12 pages that similarity among the various embryos of animals and man was a primary proof of the theory of evolution. And he called it, in fact, second to none in importance. Ernst Heinrich Haeckel, who lived from 1834 to 1919, he was a German biologist who was so much a devoted follower of Darwin that he was dubbed the Apostle of Darwinism in Germany. And he taught at the University of Jena, receiving his fame as a consequence of his popularization of the so-called theory of embryonic recapitulation, or as he called it, the biogenic law. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of this embryology, if you will. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, struggles a cell faces as it develops from a fertilized egg to a mature organism, follows many of the paths cells forged as they evolve from a primordial cell to Homo sapiens. This, of course, is what he's saying, okay? In other words, he stated that successive stages of embryonic development repeat the evolutionary stages of one's animal ancestry. In other words, the human embryo passes through all stages representing its ancestors, from one celled stage to the human. And it was like watching a silent movie picture of all your ancestral history, if you will, is what he's saying. So a word of explanation is in order then. He certainly was an accomplished artist, and all of these pictures are drawings that he made. Okay, he's just assuming that this is what took place. So another picture we look at of his drawings looks something like this. He's trying to explain evolution. He used that artistic ability to falsify the drawings that accompany his scientific articles. To support his theory, however, Haeckel, whose knowledge of embryology was self-taught, faked some of his evidence. Now you might ask, well, why am I telling you this? And the reason I'm telling you this is because if you went to any high school today and you looked at their science books, there is some of this in those science books. Even though what he has said, what Haeckel has said, has been proven or disproven by many scientists. And yet, we still use some of it today. Because Haeckel not only altered his illustrations of embryos, but also printed the same plate of an embryo 3 times, labeled on a human, the second a dog, and the third a rabbit, to show their similarity. He even went so far as to alter drawings of some of his colleagues, including the famous embryologist Dr. L. Rudemeyer of Basel University and Professor A. Bass. The University of Jena was forced to convene a university court, and 5 professors convicted Haeckel of fraud. 5 of their professors convicted him of fraud. But yet his works did more harm than good to Darwinism, and Haeckel's falsified works were published about 1866. And although we have known for over 100 years that the biogenic law isn't correct, but to this very day, some of Haeckel's drawings are still turning up in modern biology texts as proof of evolution, even in spite of testimony like that from Simpson and Keith that we quoted earlier. Yes?
I was looking at his drawings. Where's the monkey?
Well, he's not there yet, but he'll get there.
But you know what, Dale? It's just like any lie. That lies are perpetuated and spread, and you can be standing there telling the truth at the top of the housetop, and nobody wants to listen. But a lie spreads, and people believe it because that's what they want to believe.
Yeah. Well, there's an old saying that when you're wrong, you want to be wrong at the top of your voice. And that's pretty much what Haeckel was doing. He was making enough noise that there were enough people that did believe what he was doing. In his books, The Beginning of Life, 1977, embryologist Dr. E. Blesmit reveals some of his frustration with the persistence of this myth. The so-called basic law of biogenics is wrong, he said. No buts or ifs can mitigate this fact. It is not even a tiny bit correct or correct in a different form. It is totally wrong, he says. Yet in a recent 1980 survey of 15 high school biology textbooks, 9 offered embryology, and this is Haeckel's, 9 of them offered his recapitulation as evidence for evolution. So, we know that our children are being taught evolution in schools. And to some degree, teachers are actually refusing to teach the creation aspect, but only evolution. And so it's important as parents and as grandparents and even as adults working with children that we help them understand the creation side of it, because we cannot depend upon our schools to do that for us. Any thoughts?
I think sometimes mankind tries to overthink things.
Well, we do, and that
We try to have a reason why something happened.
And that comes back to the idea that we're more educated, that because of our education, we think we know better. Mike?
I was going to say, not only in our schools, but just even mainstream media. You can't turn on even say an educational program on a PBS station, and if it's about nature or something, it generally starts out with the line,
Oh, yeah. That's very true. That's very true. Well, Ron and I was talking about vestigial organs earlier, so let's talk about vestigial organs for a moment. Vestigial organs are those found in man and animals which evolutionists claim to be degenerate and thus useless. And for a long time, even our medical science felt the same way. This is why, as a child, many of you probably had your tonsils removed, when really they didn't need to be removed. But physicians didn't see any purpose in the tonsil. Appendix are oftentimes removed. Now, yes, we do have appendix attacks, and they do need to be removed. But when you talk to physicians, they thought that these were vestigial organs, that they were useless. They had no purpose. But we have to ask ourselves, if we believe in creation, was there a purpose in these organs? Did God put them in the human body for a specific reason? And the answer is yes, He did. We are told that these so-called degenerate structures, which, while useless to present-day animals, were at one time useful to their evolutionary predecessors. But they're no longer useful, according to evolutionists. These structures are said to be remnants, leftovers, which eventually will be lost through evolutionary processes of selection. Years ago, when this proof was first set forth, there were literally hundreds of examples of these so-called vestigial structures. Hundreds of them. For example, Alfred Wiedersheim published a list of 180 vestigial structures in the human system. 180. Now, think about that for just a moment, because it came to be thought of as a walking museum of antiquity. If you have 180 vestigial organs in your body. Dr. R.L. Wysong puts it, not too long ago, man was imputed to have 180 vestiges. Organs like the appendix, tonsils, thymus, pineal gland, and thyroid gland were on the list. Today, all former vestigial organs are known to have some function during the life of the individual. If the organ has any function at any time, it cannot be called rudimentary or vestigial. As man's knowledge has increased, the list of vestigial organs decreased. So what really was vestigial, was it not man's rudimentary knowledge of the intricacies of the body? For example, the thyroid at one time was thought to be vestigial, but we now know that people suffer from hypothyroidism, which I happen to be one of those individuals. If you suffer from hypothyroidism, along about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you feel really fatigued. Your energy is just completely drained out of you. If you suffer from hyperthyroidism, no matter how much you eat, you can't gain weight because you have a very high metabolism. So the thyroid has a very valid function. So, vestigial organs, while all of its functions are not fully understood, the appendix has a rich supply of blood and contains masses of lymphatic tissues in its walls, and this suggests that it may play a crucial role in the body's immune system, especially in defense against infection in young children. Its presence may also boost the antibody production in the spleen and may play a role in preventing cancer. Evolutionists believe this is a rudimentary tail. If you look down at the bottom there of the spine, that little kind of purple triangle there, if you will, it is often referred to as the tailbone. However, the coccyx serves a very real function as an anchor for muscles and tendons. And these have a role in bowel movements, giving birth, leg movement, and other functions in the lower torso. But yet, evolutionists look at it as being a vestigial organ. So, when we look at vestigial organs then, we need to appreciate the fact that God placed them in the human body for a specific reason. That they weren't there just to create business for our doctors. Any thoughts? All right. A few textbooks still mention 4 or 5 so-called vestigial organs in the human. a list which usually includes such things as the appendix, the nictitating membrane in the eye, the hair, the finger, and the toenails are still listed as vestigial organs. But we now know there are no vestigial organs in the human body, even many of those so-called vestigial organs in animals, such as the legs in pythons. Whether you realize it or not, pythons do have legs. They're very small. Hip bones in the whale. They do have hip bones. And we now know that those appendages have functions. But for a long time, they were considered to be vestigial organs. Another point that needs to be considered is this. If man does have 180 vestigial organs, organs that were once functioning, then in the past he would have had more organs than he now has. More organs than he now has. And in the past, he would have been developing the organs that he presently has, plus he would have had the 180 functional vestigial organs. So the farther we go back in time, the more complex the organism. The more complex the organism. Huh?
It shouldn't be more complex in the past than you are in the future.
Well, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's how you can use something like this to help the evolutionists realize that no, it didn't become from a simple cell and develop. If indeed you believe that man had 180 vestigial organs and he was developing all these organs, there was a time that he actually had more organs, so he was more complex than he is today. And rather an interesting evolutionary twist when you think about it. So it's no wonder that James Jauncey, in his book, Science Returns to God, states this. He says, recent works on evolution have given only scant treatment to the theory of vestigial remains. Apparently, it is not regarded any longer as being of serious evidential value. So the evolutionists have kind of set this aside because they're no longer going to make an issue out of it. Those evolutionists who keep up with scientific literature rarely discuss this issue any longer. And actually, when you consider that there are no evidences of the transitional stages between functioning organs and useless organs, then these so-called useless appendages would prove degeneration, not evolution. Because evolution says things get better. But if there was 180 vestigial organs and now there's only 4 or 5, that would show things were getting worse, degeneration. Things were getting simpler. But it's not supposed to be getting simpler. It's supposed to be getting more complex. Evolution, then, is the rise of new, different, and functioning organs, not the wasting away of organs. All right, so, you want the monkey, Cal?
I'm looking for a monkey.
There's your monkey. You look like a monkey. You look like a monkey. Dr. Carl Sagan, the eminent Cornell University astronomer, wrote, "The inner workings of terrestrial organism, from microbes to men, are so similar in their biochemical details as to make it highly likely that all organisms on the earth have evolved from a single instance of the origin of life." No. Well, it's no secret that the comparative sciences, especially anatomy and physiology, are considered among the strongest alleged evidences for evolution. In fact, much of the case for amoeba to man, type evolution is built upon a study of Christian evidences. Evolutionists argue that if similarity can be shown between organisms through comparative anatomy, embryology, vestigial organs, cytology, blood chemistry, protein, and DNA biochemistry, then evolutionary relationship can be proven. So, Strasberg and Weimer state the matter in these words in their textbooks. They say, the greater the similarity of the structure, the closer the relationship, and wherever the close relationship is found, a common ancestry is indicated. Evolutionists point out that the wings of a bat, the forefoot of a turtle, the forefoot of a frog, and the arm of a man all have the same general structure. So not only are you a monkey, but you are also a turtle and a frog and a bat. Okay? They also point out that the forefoot of the dog, the flipper of the whale, and the hands of a man have essentially the same bones and muscles. So now you are part whale. And sometimes when I step on the scale, I can agree with that. This argument can even be carried to the molecular level. For example, evolutionists often point out that the ape and the human have DNA that is similar 99% of the time. DNA that is similar 99% of the time. So we must have either evolved from a monkey or we have a common ancestor here. But when we think about this now, there can be no doubt similarities do exist. And I think we'd all agree with that. But, yes?
They never mention pigs.
No,
But we can implant pig parts
we can.
and not have it rejected like we do. But we can't do an ape part.
That's true.
Reject every time, you cannot get it overcome, no matter what the drugs are.
That's true.
And the similarities, I think, in us and pig are really quite a bit more than what you see with some monkey.
And that's exactly the last sentence I said there, is that they will agree that there are similarities. They just aren't able to prove where those similarities begin and where they end. And so you can look at these things, but that doesn't suggest that evolution is occurring. And you're exactly right. Even medicine today uses a lot of parts of the pig to help us survive today because of the similarities that are there. But similarities can certainly indicate relationship, but not necessarily this relationship. Two books on the shelf with the exact cover, but one is thicker than the other. Similarity, but they're not the same. I could conclude that the thicker one evolved from the thinner, or I could conclude that the books came from the same publisher. Maybe monkey and humans had the same designer. And they did have the same designer, but they didn't come from the same cell. So similarities, but not the same. And it is here that an extremely valuable lesson can be learned in the creation/evolution controversy. And that lesson is this. It is rarely the data that are in dispute. It is the interpretation placed on the data that is in dispute. Okay? The interpretation placed on the data that is in dispute. In the case of similarities, both evolutionists and creationists examine the same data. The evolutionist, however, says that the similarity is proof of common ancestry. The creationist, on the other hand, says the similarity is proof of creation according to a common design. The same designer. So, in essence, what we have here is, at best, a stalemate. Both sides have an answer to the data at hand. And Dr. Franco Kiss, Dean of Medical Faculty at the University of Budapest, reminds us this. He says, "It is necessary for the evolutionists, in order to maintain their theory, to collect only the similarities and to neglect the numerous differences. The textbooks on evolution usually concentrate solely on the similarities. But now, however, we have data from the evolutionists themselves concerning the differences or the similarities. Among some of those most interesting data, however, are those presented by Dr. Colin Patterson, who is senior paleontologist of the British Museum of Natural History during a 1981 visit to the United States. And what he did, he presented on amino acid sequences for the alpha hemoglobins of vipers, crocodiles, and chickens. Evolutionists know that vipers and crocodiles, which we know are two reptiles, should be much more closely related than either is to a bird, but the crocodile and the chicken showed the greatest similarity. 17.5% of their amino acids were common, whereas with the viper and the chicken, which was the next most similar, only 10.5% was common. And the two reptiles had the least similarity, 5.6%. So an examination of the amino acids in myoglobin showed that crocodiles and lizards share 10.5%. But that a lizard and a chicken, which is a reptile/bird, also shared the same percentage, 10.5%. And yet, they did not come from the same cell. They were completely created different, but they were created by the same creator. So the creation model suggests then that similarities due to a common designer who used economy of design just like architects and other designers do today. Locating items that work well and using them consistently in each thing they design. And this is why when we look at what God created, we know that it was perfect. That there wasn't any need to improve upon it because God is the perfect creator. The creator used those things he knew would work well in all or most organisms because he knew we would all have to breathe the same air. We would all have to drink the same water. We would all have to eat the same types of organic foods. And in general, we would all have to co-inhabit the earth. And so the Creator created the perfect creation then. He then varied the blueprint as he saw fit to adapt an organism to a particular environment. He gave sheep 4 legs, but he gave humans only 2 legs. The thought though is that he gave them both legs, didn't he? The creation model accounts for both similarities and differences. The evolution model cannot account for numerous differences, thereby tumbling in ruins. Any thoughts? So when we look at genetic mutations as evolution's mechanism, Darwin, in his Origin of Species, had argued that species are always changing, the result of natural selection. And his concept was that of descent with modification with continual and gradual change. Today, though, mutations are random. The alleged mechanism of neo-Darwinism, as it has come to be known, is genetic mutations plus natural selection. It cannot be overemphasized that today, the only known mechanism of evolution is natural selection plus genetic mutations. And we are told that nature has selected beneficial mutations and incorporated them into various organisms, eventually causing those organisms to change from one kind to another. If mutations are the ultimate raw materials for evolution, and therefore provide the only known mechanism for evolution, there are many very serious problems if we accept this idea of mutations. And the first idea then is mutations are random. C.H. Waddington, the famous evolutionary geneticist, once said, "It remains true to say that we know of no way other than random mutations by which hereditary variation comes into being." Henry Morris agrees, saying there is no way to control mutations to make them produce characteristics which might be needed. Natural selection must simply take what comes. And so the second one I put up there is mutations are very rare, not common. Dr. F.J. Yala, who is an evolutionary geneticist, states that it is probably fair to estimate the frequency of a majority of mutations in higher organisms between 1 in 10,000 and 1 in a million per gene per generation. And then we also have good mutations are very, very rare. There are at least 3 types of mutations: theoretically bad, good, and neutral. Obviously, the bad mutations cause various diseases and death. We're concerned right now, and you've been hearing a lot on the news, occurring in China, bird flu. At one time, all it could do is mutate from one bird to another. Now it's beginning to mutate in the form that it's mutating from birds to human beings. And their greatest concern is once it develops, mutates further, it can mutate from one human being to another human being, and that means life-threatening situations. And so our FDA and countries, our scientists and medical scientists, not only in this country but in China and other countries, are working diligently to find a vaccine for the bird flu, because eventually it will become. And you look at another disease that we see today that you're hearing more about, we call it MRSA, MRSA. It's methicillin-resistant Staph aureus is what it is. Now, whether you realize it or not, every one of you have Staph aureus on your body right now. You can't get rid of it. It's part of the skin. It's the outer surface. If you were to cut your skin, then the Staph aureus gets inside your body. If it's methicillin resistant, then it becomes very lethal. And people die from it because there's not many drugs that will treat methicillin resistant Staph aureus. This is all mutation. And this is the point I'm making here, is that mutations, most mutations, are bad. And if they're bad, then they are harmful. They cause various diseases and death. And this is not what the evolutionist wants. Neutral mutations neither help nor do they harm anyone. So the question is, how often do good mutations occur? And Dr. H.J. Mueller, Nobel laureate in genetics, said, according to the great majority of mutations, certainly well over 99% are harmful in some way, as is to be expected of the effects of accidental occurrences. 99% of mutations are harmful. So the evolutionist has to be wrong, because we certainly were not developed through evolution or through mutations. Dr. Dobzhansky admitted that favorable mutations amount to less than 1% of all mutations that occurred, and this was in Evolution and Christian Faith, published in 1969. Yes?
An evolutionist would probably argue at this point that where that mutation would be considered poor or bad for humans, for the Staph aureus, that's a good mutation for them, because it enhances their ability to survive. So if you look at it from the mutating organism, it could be a very profitable, or it could be a very beneficial mutation for them and for extending their livelihood. Whereas opposed to humans, it could have bad ramifications. But that would be an argument as to just defining how do you define what is a good mutation in what context?
Mm-hmm. Well, and your point's well taken and everything. Evolutionists are going to make an argument on trying to justify the mutations. There's no doubt about it. This is why I'm quoting evolutionists here, that they will admit that 99% of all mutations are bad. Maybe for the human, but maybe, they might want to claim that maybe for snakes or something else it might be good. But in fact, we'd have to look at some of those mutations. I don't have any examples right now, and maybe some of you might have an example where a mutation has occurred. I can tell you this. Would you consider a two-headed calf a mutation? Huh? Aberration. But will a two-headed calf live? And they generally die pretty soon. They might live for a short time, but they will die because it's not natural creation. It was not what God intended. Now, you're right, it's an aberration. It's not necessarily a mutation. But certainly, mutations, if in fact mutations was good, they could create a two-headed calf and it'd be all right. They could create...
That's a crazy way of looking at it, because what is the end? And where was the anything. All that says is that something can change.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
so it doesn't, that doesn't, when somebody talks about that argument, they're just trying to prove their point, they're not looking at the truth. See, they never looked at the evidence.
Well, and that is true. And that is what is the conclusion that we can draw.
Off that trail, that's just where that trail's going, nowhere.
Yeah, and what is the conclusion we can draw from these facts? And you're exactly right. It doesn't prove anything. Dr. Simpson admitted that if there was an effective breeding population of 100 million individuals and they produced a new generation daily, the likelihood of obtaining good evolutionary results from mutations could be expected only about 1 in about 274 billion years. And this is an evolutionist saying this. So they acknowledge and recognize that most mutations are not good.
It's not reliable.
It's not what?
It doesn't have order. There's no reliability to that.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
They base all their theories on reliability, but yet their own theory isn't reliable. It's just showing you that something else could happen, but we don't know what will happen. We just have to wait and see.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Any other thoughts? Yes. Do you have another thought? Okay. Any other thoughts? All right, so what we need to talk about is the record of fossils for just a little bit. And I know that the first bell has already rung, so we won't get very far in this. But keep in mind, if the theory of evolution is a true account of the origin of life on Earth, it is obvious that the record of gradual development of plant and animal forms to higher forms should be found embedded in the crust of the Earth in successive layers. Everybody would agree with that, right? So, the first thing is fossils is any remain or impression or trace of an animal or plant or a former geological age as a skeleton or a footprint. Paleontology is the science of the forms of life existing in former geological periods as represented by fossil animals and plants. So, the fossil record then, what would the fossil record tell us if evolution is true?
You have different kinds that merge, like a cat dog, or you have different, they don't have any proof of that. There's no proof of any kind of different kinds. They have different things that may have changed a little bit, but they don't have anything that was different. They don't have any fish dogs or anything like cats.
That's right. And the point is that if you look at each layer of Earth as the years went by, and they're saying the Earth is millions of years old, and each strata layer, you should see a evolvement of a...
You don't have any monkey men or anything.
No, you don't. And so we'll look at that, since that was our second bill.